everyone, I'm Wayne and welcome back to my channel. Over the past few weeks, one topic has generated a lot of discussion in the property market. The government had just announced a series of new EC policy changes, and naturally, many buyers, upgraders and homeowners will be curious to know what this means for them. In today's video, we'll break that down and what exactly has changed, why the government stepped in, and most importantly, what the potential impact could be on buyers, upgraders and the broader property market moving forward.
Now, before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only. It is solely based on my opinion and my analysis. Please always do your own research and due diligence before making any decisions. If you are liking the content so far, do hit the like and subscribe button, as your simple gesture will keep me motivated to post more contents like this. At the side is my social media handles. If you like the personalized guidance tailored to your own circumstances, you can scan the QR code to get in touch with me for a one-to-one consultation. Without further ado, let's get back to the video.
Now, before we jump into what are the new changes, it is important for you to first understand why ECs were created in the first place. Because once we understand their original intended purpose, these latest policy changes will start to make a lot more sense. If you have enjoyed property insights and educational content like this, do support the channel by hitting the like, share and subscribe button so you don't miss out in future updates. Without further ado, let's dive in. Executive condominiums were never meant to be luxury assets nor become one of Singapore's most powerful wealth progression tools. When ECs were first introduced in 1996, the objective was actually very straightforward: to help middle-income Singaporeans who had wanted to upgrade from HDB living but were not comfortable entering the private market due to its prices. In other words, ECs were designed to bridge the gap between public and private housing. The first EC, Eastvale in Pasir Ris, was completed in 1999. Back then, ECs offered something extremely attractive. You could enjoy condominium facilities, private living, CPF grants and subsidized pricing, all while paying significantly less than a comparable private condominium. The value proposition was crystal clear. But fast forward to today, if you look at the numbers, EC prices have risen tremendously over the past decade. Back in 2016, the average EC launch price was roughly $782 per square foot. Today, we are looking at approximately $1,843 per square foot. That's more than a 130% increase in just 10 years. And while private property prices have also risen, the gap between ECs and private condominiums has narrowed considerably. Historically, buyers could expect ECs to be roughly 20 to 30% cheaper than comparable private developments. Today, the difference has become much less obvious, with prices of certain private developments such as Tengah Gardens residences equating to or maybe even cheaper than an EC launched in the same period. That is the reason why Tengah Gardens sold an impressive 99% of their units on their launch day. In fact, many buyers are now directly comparing ECs against private condominiums during their decision-making process. And from the government's perspective, that raises an important question. If ECs are starting to look and feel increasingly similar to private condominiums from a pricing standpoint, are they still serving the group they were originally intended for? I suspect that's one of the key reasons behind this latest measurement. Because while the intention is to improve affordability and prioritize genuine homeowners, there's another issue that many people don't talk about enough, and that's financing. One of the biggest obstacles EC buyers today are facing isn't just the purchase price, it's the financing framework itself. For EC purchases, buyers are subjected to the mortgage servicing ratio, MSR, which means only 30% of a household's gross monthly income can be used to service the mortgage. This is further limited by the maximum combined income ceiling of $16,000 per household to be able to qualify for an EC. Private property buyers, on the other hand, are assessed under the total debt servicing ratio, or TDSR, which allows up to 55% of their gross monthly income to be allotted towards their whole debt obligations, including their home loan. But this is not limited by any income ceiling. As a result of this financing framework, ECs are significantly more restrictive than that of private properties. Let me give you a practical example using Revell at Tampines. A 3-bedroom of 926 square feet is approximately $1.8 million. Assuming the couple has already accumulated a combined CPF balance of $400,000, after deducting the maximum loan amount, they still need to come up with approximately $395,000 in cash beyond the loan and CPF. Then add in buyer's stamp duty of approximately $59,600. That means the total upfront cash outlay becomes about $454,600, almost $500,000. For a product that was originally intended for the sandwich class. But that's just a 3-bedroom, 926 square feet, 3-bedder plus study. Let's look at a larger unit. A 4-bedroom at Revell is approximately $2.35 million. With the same income ceiling, the same maximum loan of $1.005 million, and assuming the same CPF savings of $400,000, the buyer still needs to fork out about $945,000 cash, plus buyer stamp duty of $87,100. Total upfront outlay, approximately $1,032,100. But that's just a 4-bedroom premium 1184 square feet. Now, let's go one step further. 5-bedroom unit at approximately $2.75 million. With the same income ceiling, the same maximum loan, and assuming the same CPF savings of $400,000, the buyers still need to fork out about $1.345 million, plus buyer stamp duty of $107,100, the total upfront outlay, approximately $1.452 million. Just let that sink in for a moment. Now, let's look at the exact same household earning $16,000 a month with a combined CPF savings of $400,000 in their OA, but this time, they are buying a private condominium in the same price range. At the $1.8 million mark, the required 75% loan is $1.35 million, and they comfortably qualify for it. Factoring in the buyer's stamp duty of $59,600 and deducting their $400,000 CPF savings, their total cash outlay is $109,600. At the $2.35 million mark, the required 75% loan is $1.762,500, which they still qualify for. With a BSD of $87,100 and their $400,000 CPF fully utilized, their cash outlay is $274,600. At the $2.75 million mark, the 75% loan required is $2.062 million. This exceeds their maximum eligible loan, which caps out at $1.843 million. Because of this shortfall, they have to front the difference in cash. Coupled with a buyer's stamp duty of $107,000 and deducting their $400,000 CPF, their total cash outlay is $614,100. Here's an infographic of what I just mentioned above. Look at the amount of cash outlay difference between an EC and a private condo of the same price. As you can see, despite facing a loan shortfall for the $2.75 million private property, the buyer's cash outlay remains substantially lower compared to purchasing an EC of equal or lesser value. If ECs were originally designed to help the sandwich class bridge the gap between HDB and private housing, has the combination of rising EC prices and the restrictive 30% MSR resulted in a situation where the intended target audience now needs substantially more upfront cash than if they were to buy a similarly priced private condominium under the 55% TDSR framework. In the past, many buyers were willing to take up this heavy cash burden because the payoff was almost guaranteed. Upon the sale of their EC, they could gain proceeds of more than $500,000 to $1 million. However, recognizing that the EC market was drifting away from its original intent of affordable housing, the government stepped in with the latest EC policy changes. First, the minimum occupation period has been extended from 5 years to 10 years. This is arguably the biggest change. For years, one of the strongest attractions of buying a new EC was the wealth progression story. Buy during launch, wait for construction, fulfill your 5-year MOP, then upgrade, restructure, or reposition your portfolio with massive 6-figure gains close to $500,000. Now, the timeline changes dramatically. If construction takes 3 to 4 years and MOP becomes 10 years, buyers could realistically be looking at least a 13 to 14-year commitment before executing their next major property move. That's a significant difference. Will demand disappear? I would say no. Families buying for genuine own-stay purposes will continue to buy, but progression-focused buyers may now think more carefully before committing. The second change is riding on the MOP is full privatization being pushed back from 10 years to 15 years. Personally, I think this change is the one with the least impact. In fact, previously I did a video on when is the best time to sell your EC. You can still find it on my YouTube channel. For those who haven't watched it, my view has always been that ECs are fundamentally designed to serve Singaporeans and the local community rather than foreign buyers. The data already supports this. When we look at where most ECs are located in heartland estates and cater primarily to owner-occupiers and upgraders. On top of that, foreign buyers today are subjected to a 60% ABSD, which already makes private residential properties far less attractive from an investment standpoint. So while this policy change may sound significant on paper, I don't believe it will have a major impact on the EC resale demand or long-term values. The core buyer pool remains largely unchanged as the main bulk of buyers are still Singaporeans and permanent residents, and that's what ultimately drives the market. The third change is the removal of the deferred payment scheme, and this is one of the most important and significant change that impacts the HDB upgraders. Deferred payment was an incredibly useful tool for HDB upgraders because it made the transition into EC much smoother and far less stressful. Under the deferred payment scheme, buyers only need to pay the initial 20% down payment upon purchase. After that, they do not need to service the mortgage immediately. The remaining payments would be deferred. Subsequently, they will wait for the EC to be completed, typically 3 to 4 years later, before their home loan repayments begin, reducing their financial burden. Even at this point, only 65% would be payable upon key collection, and the final 15% typically 1 year later after the project attains CSC, where the full loan is then dispersed and converted into a regular monthly mortgage. This means that HDB owners could continue staying in their existing flat throughout the construction period without having to juggle 2 housing loans at the same time. More importantly, it removed the pressure of having to sell their HDB early, rent a temporary place, and move multiple times before collecting the keys to their new home. The process was simple. Secure the EC today, continue living in your HDB during the construction period, and only when the EC was ready would you sell your existing flat and use the sales proceeds to help fund the new property. For many upgrading families, deferred payment wasn't just a financing option. It was a practical bridge that made upgrading more manageable, more comfortable, and significantly less disruptive to their daily lives. In other words, buyers had time. Time to continue staying in their HDB, accumulate their savings, and build up their CPF. This created a very smooth transition for many HDB upgraders. Without the deferred payment scheme, many HDB upgraders may now find themselves in a very different situation. Buyers may now have to service 2 mortgages concurrently. On one hand, they are still paying their existing HDB mortgage. On the other hand, they are also required to service the EC progressive payment loan as construction progresses. And that's where cash flow starts becoming a real challenge. Because if you cannot comfortably afford the down payment and both the HDB mortgage and the EC progressive payment at the same time, but still wish to purchase the EC, your alternative may be to sell your HDB much earlier, which means you may end up renting for the next 3 to 4 years while waiting for the EC to be completed. Think about that. Over a 4-year period, a family could easily spend well into the 6 figures on rental alone while waiting to collect the keys to their new home. This is why affordability isn't just about the purchase price of a property. Affordability is also about the cash flow. It's about whether they can comfortably navigate the transitions from one home to another. A family may be able to afford the EC on paper, but if the cash flow requirements become too demanding during the transition period, that upgrade may no longer be practical. That's why I believe the removal of the deferred payment scheme will have a significant impact on HDB upgraders. For many families, it doesn't just make upgrading more expensive, it makes the entire upgrading journey more complicated, more disruptive, and potentially much harder to execute. But in my opinion, the biggest game changer isn't any of the measures we have discussed so far. The real game changer is what comes next. It's the changes in the quota. First-timer allocation is increased from 70% to 90%, which means that second-timer allocations drops from 30% to just 10%. In my opinion, this is one of the most significant changes announced. Previously, 70% of EC units were reserved for first-timers, while 30% were allocated to second-timers. Under the new framework, first-timers will now enjoy 90% of the allocation, leaving just 10% for second-timers. While the intention is clearly to improve access for first-time buyers, the consequences is that many genuine upgrader families will now be competing for a much smaller pool of units. Take Aura of Tampines as an example. Under the previous framework, approximately 283 units were eventually sold to second-timers. With this new allocation, that number will have been closer to just 76 units. That's 200 families who could have been potentially excluded from the EC market, and those aren't speculative investors. These are families looking for more space, families whose children are growing up, and families who have been planning their upgrade journey for years. Which brings me to the fifth change. Second-timer priority period extended from 1 month to 2 years. This is where I believe the real behavioral shift begins. Previously, even if the second-timer quota was fully subscribed, buyers would only need to wait 1 month before they could compete for the remaining units. Now, if they miss out on the allocated quota, they will need to wait up to 2 years before receiving another opportunity. Think about that for a moment. Most second-timers are not investors waiting for the perfect entry point. They are households with immediate housing needs. They need additional bedrooms, more living space, a better environment for their growing families, or even near certain schools for their kids' education. The bigger question is, where does the displaced demand goes from here? Because property markets are ultimately driven by human behavior. The reality is that most upgraders are unlikely to put their plans on hold for 2 years. Instead, they will simply look elsewhere. And this is where the biggest ripple effect begins. Demand doesn't just disappear because access to ECs become more restrictive. It gets redirected. Let's break this down into 3 major impacts this will have on the market. The first impact, a massive rush towards the final 5 EC launches. This is probably the most immediate effect because all 5 upcoming executive condominium launches are still operating under the existing framework. For many buyers, these launches represent the final opportunity to enter into the EC market before the new rule fully kicks in. Buyers who were previously sitting on the fence may decide to move earlier. Families who intended to wait another year or 2 may suddenly bring forward their plans. As a result, the final batch of EC launches could potentially see stronger competition, larger application rates, and greater pressure on balloting outcomes. To find out what are the 5 EC launches under the old ruling, do drop me a DM and I'll get back to you. Impact number 2. Demand spillover into private new launches. The fundamental need to upgrade doesn't just simply disappear. It shifts. Families still need more space, children still grow up, lifestyle aspirations don't simply get put on hold because of a policy change. With 90% of future EC units reserved for first-timers, second-timers now face a potential 2-year wait-out period. If you are a HDB upgrader with immediate housing needs, would you really put your family's plans on hold for 2 years and hope that prices remains unchanged? It's almost certain that these buyers will naturally start exploring other alternatives. And that's where competitively priced private launches will benefit, especially for projects in locations such as dairy farm, Lentor, or other OCR developments. Buyers may find that the prices are more attractive compared to an EC. With less restrictive financing framework and not being subjected to a 10 years MOP, minimizing the opportunity cost of having their capital tied up for an extended holding period. Impact number 3. Increased demand for resale condominiums. For EC purchases, buyers are subjected to the mortgage servicing ratio, but for private residential properties, financing is assessed based on the total debt servicing ratio. This is the psychological trap most buyers fall into. We are conditioned to believe that EC is the safe and affordable option. But what if the very policy designed to keep housing affordable is the exact thing pricing you out? A family earning the exact same household income may actually find that they would need a lesser cash outlay when purchasing a private condominium compared to an EC. These could create additional demand in the real estate condominium segment, particularly for larger family-sized units in the OCR or RCR region, where many upgraders are already actively searching. To be fair, I understand why the government stepped in. When ECs were first introduced in 1996, they were meant to help Singapore's sandwich class. But with prices climbing from $700 per square foot in the earlier years to transactions approaching $1,800 per square foot today, it is a growing concern. However, every cooling measure creates second-order effects. If you were the developer and let's say the 2 years wait-out period eventually expires, would you release the remaining units at the same price, or would you reprice the units according to prevailing market conditions? Because if property prices have appreciated during these 2 years, plus it is nearer to the completion of the construction, meaning a shorter period of rental, would there still be a strong demand from the HDB upgraders? Which raises a fascinating thought. Could the 2 years wait-out period unintentionally result in some buyers having to pay a higher price later for a product they could have purchased earlier at a lower price? Because when that happens, the conversation is no longer about whether demand exists. The conversation becomes one of opportunity cost. Would you rather secure the opportunity today or risk paying more for the very same opportunity tomorrow? And that's why I believe every upgrader should start planning early. Not because you should rush into a purchase, but because the families who understand their options earliest are often the ones who make the best decisions. If you're an HDB owner wondering whether you should secure an EC now, explore a private condominium instead, or simply understand how these changes affects your family upgrading journey, let's have a conversation. Sometimes the biggest cost isn't making the wrong move, it's waiting too long to make the right one. Once again, I'm Wayne, your go-to trusted real estate advisor, helping you navigate every property move with confidence and clarity. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.